The Buried Secret of the Ozarks, the Eliza Whitlock Case of Welcome, and prepare to journey back in time to the deep, silent hollows of the Missouri Ozarks. We're about to delve into a mystery that lay buried for decades, a story woven from whispers, forgotten diaries, and a truth that refused to stay hidden. Before we begin, I'm genuinely curious. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and the exact time. There's something compelling about knowing which corners of the world are hearing this story, and at what hour as we unravel this dark piece of history together. The winter of 1912 was bitingly cold. In the city of Springfield, readers of the Republican newspaper might have skimmed past a brief 3-paragraph notice tucked away on an inside page. It mentioned a family disturbance in remote Tawney County, deep in the Ozark Mountains. The article stated that authorities had looked into the disappearance of a woman named Eliza Whitlock from her isolated homestead. Her husband, Thomas, claimed she had left of her own will after a domestic quarrel. The paper concluded that no further action was required. It was a small, unremarkable story, the kind that fades from memory by the next news cycle. But this flicker in the press was not an end. It was the first faint crack in a facade that would hide one of the region's most unsettling tragedies for 40 years. The Whitlock property was an island of human endeavor in a sea of wilderness. Perched on 40 rocky acres near the settlement of Walnut Shade, about 15 miles from the county seat of Forsyth, the homestead consisted of a 2-story timber frame house, a barn, and a handful of outbuildings. County records show Thomas Whitlock bought the land in 1908 after moving from Springfield, where he'd worked as a department store clerk. He was described as a quiet man of particular habits. His wife, Eliza, formerly Eliza Crawford, had been a schoolteacher before their marriage in 1905. They had 2 children, 6-year-old Edward and 4-year-old Mary. Neighbors would later recall them as a profoundly private family, ghosts on the periphery of community life. Thomas made occasional supply trips to town, but Eliza became a near recluse after their first year there. Such isolation wasn't uncommon. The Ozarks, with their dense forests, steep bluffs, and hidden hollows, have always been a place where people go to disappear from society, from the law, or from their past. According to Joseph Miller, a neighbor interviewed decades later, the Whitlocks seemed reasonably content at first. About 6 months before Eliza vanished, a change came over Thomas. He became intensely focused on the property's security, adding new locks to the doors and beginning construction on a deep-root cellar behind the house. The last outsider to see Eliza alive was a midwife, Harriet Bowman, who visited in November 1911. She found Eliza pale, nervous, and strangely distant, the air in the house thick with unspoken tension. Thomas hovered throughout the visit, answering questions meant for his wife. When the midwife suggested a doctor, Thomas refused, saying they couldn't afford it. Bank records later revealed he had been steadily withdrawing the family savings that autumn, claiming it was for winter preparations, an amount that seemed excessive for their means. Then, the Ozark winter descended with a vengeance. The winter of 1911-1912 was brutal, sealing remote homesteads in a frozen silence for weeks. Snowdrifts piled high and temperatures plunged below zero. It was during this deep freeze, in the blurred window between late February and early March, that Eliza Whitlock was said to have disappeared. Thomas first mentioned it casually to his neighbor in late March, offering no details. Around the same time, at the general store in Forsyth, Thomas bought enough supplies to last for months. The store owner noted his agitated state and his cryptic remark when asked after Eliza, "She is not my concern at present." The matter would have ended there, swallowed by the hills, if not for Eliza's sister, Catherine Crawford. Alarmed by the long silence, she wrote letters, only to receive the shocking news that Eliza had supposedly abandoned her family. Catherine traveled to Tawney County and pressed Sheriff James Harmon to investigate. In her journal, she wrote, "I cannot believe Eliza would willingly leave her children. Her devotion to Edward and Mary was absolute. Something is terribly wrong." Sheriff Harmon visited the homestead. His official report noted a tidy property, quiet children, and Thomas's calm story. Eliza's clothes were gone. There was no sign of a struggle. The case was closed. But in his private notebook, a different story emerged. Harmon wrote of fresh-turned earth behind the house, shaped like a trench, not a garden, and children who watched their father's face for cues before speaking. He suspected foul play but had no body, no witness, only a feeling of profound dread. For years, life on the homestead continued under a pall of silence. A local woman, Martha Jenkins, helped with the children. She later recalled Thomas's strange rules. The root cellar was strictly off limits. She found him pacing at night, muttering about maintaining the barriers. The children, at school, were deeply troubled. Their teacher, Abigail Thornton, documented Edward's nightmares and dissociative episodes where he would whisper, "She's still digging." Mary drew pictures of a woman lying beneath the ground. When the teacher voiced her concerns, Thomas threatened to remove the children from school. Then, in 1917, after the school superintendent initiated an inquiry, Thomas sold the property at a loss and vanished with his children to Kansas City. The truth slumbered for decades. In 1952, new owners of the abandoned property discovered a small, water-damaged diary wedged in the ruins of the old root cellar. It was Eliza's. The entries began with the ordinary chronicles of a mother's life, but curdled into a record of mounting terror. She wrote of Thomas's paranoia, of windows nailed shut, of being a prisoner in her own home. She described a tonic he forced on her that made her groggy, and her fear of the deep cellar he called a sanctuary, which felt to her like a tomb. The final, heart-stopping entry, dated February 17, 1912, read, "He found these pages tonight. His rage was terrible. The children are locked in their room. I hear him digging again." Based on this diary, Sheriff William Masterson ordered an excavation. There, beneath the cellar floor, they found Eliza's remains. The autopsy confirmed blunt force trauma. Her hands had been bound with wire. She had been buried face down. The official investigation now revealed that Thomas had died in 1931, and his son Edward had been killed in World War II. Only the daughter, Mary, survived, living in Omaha. When contacted, she claimed to remember nothing, insisting her mother had simply left. But her husband privately told investigators that Mary suffered from a lifelong terror of enclosed spaces and the sound of digging. She had nightmares of a woman calling from under the floorboards. Further evidence emerged. A childhood friend of Edward S. recalled the boy asking if people could hear things through the ground. Records from a state asylum revealed Thomas's father had died there, afflicted by violent paranoid delusions, suggesting a hereditary threat of mental illness. The most poignant testimony came from Mary's own son. After her death in 1968, he found a collection of her childhood drawings, repeated, haunting images of a small female figure buried beneath the ground. A psychologist's analysis stated the drawings were a clear expression of traumatic memory. Her son wrote to the Historical Society, "Now I understand. She was protecting us from a truth she could not face." The case of Eliza Whitlock is a chilling lesson in how isolation can breed atrocity. It shows how the cultural sanctity of a man's home became a prison wall for his wife. Thomas Whitlock buried his wife twice, first in the cold Ozark soil, and then beneath a lie that she had abandoned her family. For 40 years, the limestone bluffs kept their secret. But the truth, like a seed in the dark, eventually pushed its way toward the light. It surfaced in a child's whisper, in the frantic script of a hidden diary, and in the nightmares of a daughter who could never fully escape the sound of digging in the valley. It reminds us that the most profound horrors are not supernatural, but human, and that silence can be the most complicit accomplice of all.